Hi, I just want to spend a little bit of time discussing jumping to conclusions. And the reason this is coming to my mind is because on May the 27th, British Airways had a major computer problem. And there was chaos at Heathrow and Gatwick, and for several days, flights were cancelled, people couldn't get on, they couldn't get access to their luggage. And as soon as this happened, right, everyone, I can't say everyone, but there's a whole bunch of stuff on Twitter of, see, this is what happens when you don't test your software. See, this is what happens when you don't performance test your software. See, this is what happens when you don't stress test your software. See, this is what happens when you outsource your computer software development to India. See, this is what happens when, and there's a whole bunch of suppositions and jumping to conclusions. The only evidence that happened over the period of time that this was going on was that the chairman of British Airways came up and went, we had a power supply problem. And pretty much everyone in IT went, what? That is mental. How is that possible? We shouldn't have a power supply problem that knocks down your system. That seems to be a valid conclusion based on some evidence. Then everyone went, well, we should have been able to test it. You should have tested your resilience. You should have tested whatever. Now, there's an interesting thing here. They may well have tested it. There was no evidence presented that testing wasn't done. I can imagine a situation where you've put your software in a data center. You've virtualized the environments that your software is working on. So when you're testing your software and you're testing for failover, it is switching between the different versions of the software that are installed on the different environments. And if you don't technically understand the environments you're working on, I can imagine a situation where all the environments that you're testing on are virtualized. And so when you test failover between environments, you're testing failover between different virtualized environments. And you don't know that all those virtual environments are in the same data center, possibly on the same machine. So that if there is a power supply issue, you have no resilience because it was all gone down. Now, I'm not saying that was the problem, but I can imagine a situation where, given the evidence that was stated about the problem, that might happen. One thing that we have to train ourselves to do as testers, a fundamental testing skill, is trying to avoid jumping to conclusions. Now, we know that we jump to conclusions when we say things like, we find something in the system that doesn't look right, and we go, I found a bug. We walk up here, I found a problem in your software, this is a bug, look at what I have found. And we jumped to a conclusion without doing enough analysis to demonstrate that it's a problem, without providing evidence that it impacts something, without providing evidence that it is repeatable, without providing evidence that the actions that you took that made whatever you saw happen, the observation that you took, cause it to occur. You don't provide the evidence for that. You jump to a conclusion. And unfortunately, that is a natural thing for us to do as people. We've grown up in an environment where we've had to evolve through hunter-gathering situations, and we very quickly have to come to a conclusion based on minimal observations to take action. Otherwise, we might die. Right? There's a noise in the corner. Is that noise something that I need to fight, or do I need to run away from it? We have to make decisions very quickly, so we have to jump to conclusions. So for minimal observations, we jump to conclusions. That's a natural thing. And we as testers have to develop a skill to temper that reaction, to reduce it, so that we pause, we wait, we look to see what evidence there is. We look to see whether we can investigate further to get more evidence. Because otherwise, all that happens is we report things in terms of what we're first seeing. We jump to conclusions about outsourcing. British Airways fundamentally has always had software problems. I've used British Airways for a long time. There have always been software problems in it. British Airways computers have gone down a lot. It clearly wasn't an outsourcing problem, because British Airways has had problems before outsourcing. But it isn't just BA. I'm at a conference at the moment, and I flew on another airline, and we had emails getting sent to us saying that our flight had been cancelled when it wasn't, our flight had moved time when it wasn't, SMS messages saying your flight has changed time because they had a software problem. Now, later reports coming through suggest that it was a power supply problem, but clearly there was some problems in their data center that led to some systems going down. But what's worse is that the Register, which is a very good documentation and news reporting site for IT things, is reporting that 200 systems were involved in a single transaction, that the British Airways systems are so intertwined that if there's a problem with any one of their systems, the entire thing has problems and collapses. Now that's a really poor infrastructure and architecture if that is the case. And testing isn't going to save you from that. That is an architecture issue. That is a design issue. Testing clearly is part of that. But that doesn't mean that it hasn't been tested, that the flaws here have not been reported, that the flaws here have not been recognized. Businesses work on the basis of risk, and they make decisions about what risks to accept and what risks they're going to deal with. And it's entirely possible that everything that we saw in 27th of May for a couple of days had been reported to British Airways management and higher levels. We don't know, but that they said, we will take the risk. We are mitigating this through a data center. We have all these different things and contingencies in place, and we have tested them. See, it works. This won't happen. Even though ongoing evidence on Twitter suggests that British Airways pretty much has software problems all the time. But the main point for this is try and avoid jumping to conclusions, because that is a massive source of relationship problems on computer projects, where we jump to a particular conclusion, we phrase things in a way that don't actually match evidence or have any evidence supporting it, and then we're just clashing heads on belief systems because our observation does not match someone else's understanding, and there's no evidence to discuss, there's no reality to actually discuss objectively, so everything becomes a subjective statement. And that's when people clash and collide. So we as testers have to train ourselves to avoid jumping to conclusions, or recognize when we do jump to conclusions and then go off and seek more evidence. That is a fundamental testing skill.